What's up, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of WagMe TV. The fellas are back this week, and today we got a great episode for you. We're going to be covering the Sui Mainnet launch happening today, May 3rd at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. We did a deep dive on Sui a couple months back, so if you're interested, definitely go check that out. But it's no doubt one of the biggest and most hyped launches of the year. As a refresher, it's an L1 blockchain. We're super excited to cover it again today. So let's jump right in. Mata, can you remind us why this is one of the most hyped launches of the year?
Yeah, absolutely. Really quickly. So it is an L1 blockchain, as Sam alluded to. It's really designed from the ground up to build Web3 and really focus on user design. And one of the biggest things about it is that it utilizes the Move language, which has been really big for both themselves as well as Aptos, which you've heard about this year as well, who had a recent airdrop. The other big piece about Sui is the team itself, right? They were founders with really a lot of experience in at Facebook or at Meta prior to that. So very bright, brilliant with what they do. Have a lot of thought leadership behind this, and I think it's a very solid team to actually be leading Sui into kind of this L1 space, if you will, and really start to take on your Ethereums. And we were kind of comparing it to like a Solana killer prior to that as well. So that was kind of the big hype of the last bull run, was all these Ethereum killers. So it's going to be interesting. None of those individual L1 blockchains were really able to take them out. So the big question still kind of remains: who's going to come in and potentially be a real ETH killer for them? And so those are kind of the big pieces. But again, we do have a video that goes a little bit deeper into kind of the more background of Sui as well. So feel free to check that out below. I think one of the big things that we wanted to cover today, obviously, they have their mainnet launch today, May 3rd. And we wanted to talk a little bit about, obviously, some of the big things for L1s are speed, right? Transaction speeds as a whole. And I think Evan had some news that came from this, and kind of a little bit of controversy that came around that as well, that we wanted to cover really briefly.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a pretty exciting day when Evan Chen and the team announced that they would be coming out with Sui. And, the testnet has been live for more than a year now, and it's had, pretty successful performance over the last year. But yeah, like you guys said, mainnet's coming out tomorrow, and they had some initial tests go through to really be able to determine the performance of that mainnet. And what they found was that, it was able to do roughly 300,000 transactions per second, which, when you look at other, blockchains around the space, I think Ethereum does around 30 transactions per second. I think Solana's, said that they could do up to 10,000, maybe do a couple thousand in actual, practice. But this is, a huge number, one that would, totally upend, the blockchain space if it, really was true. And I think that's where, like you're saying, Mata, there's some controversy around this because, yeah, while it might be advertised that this is 30,000 transactions per second for this blockchain, maybe in practice they're doing roughly 10,000 transactions per second. And the biggest thing with this stuff is that Sui's actually counting each database interaction as a transaction. And so, there's kind of this difference in what we think of as like the base unit of performance of a blockchain. Is it a single interaction with the database, or is it a single transaction where you're actually, sending currency from one wallet to another wallet? And so I think that's something where there's a lot of, maybe not FUD, but, just kind of gray area around some of these performance numbers that get thrown out because, if some other blockchains were talking about how, one transaction is a database interaction, you could see them having maybe 1 million TPS. And so I think that's something that you kind of need to pay attention to when you're talking about, like, you're seeing these new layer ones come out, is what are they really judging as a single transaction per second. So, but like we said, 10,000 transactions per second, that's extremely performant. That is a really solid blockchain. When you look at the time to finality, 480 milliseconds, that's very solid. When you look at the time to finality with Ethereum, it could be maybe 10 minutes, 12 minutes, I believe. And I think that's pretty close to what Solana is as well. But when you look at the test that they did it across, really 9 major regions around the earth or around the world, with around 100 validators. And so, when you look at that 10,000 numbers for 10,000 TPS is what they were saying, it's a solid number, and one that I think you can take, with a grain of confidence, because 100 validators, 9 different regions. But yeah, so back to that 300,000 number, it was kind of controversial, and one that I think we saw other people wanting to react to, because they weren't sure really what it meant, or if people were kind of getting led astray, because that's an enormous number and a big claim. So within a day, we saw Aptos put out a thread here talking about how there really needs to be a standard for judging the performance of these new blockchains, these new L1 blockchains that come out. And they talk about how really their idea of a transaction is when one user sends something to another. Some transactions on other blockchains, like I believe Solana, they count votes around their consensus. And so, sometimes those are system transactions and not user transactions. And so I think there's a lot of gray area when it comes to, these metrics. And it's something where I think it was a pretty interesting statement talking about how there really needs to be a set idea of what a transaction is in this space. But nonetheless, obviously Sui's coming out tomorrow, 10,000 TPS, super performant, maybe not the 300 that they advertise, but still impressive. So yeah, would love to hear you guys' thoughts on all of that.
Yeah, I think it's definitely going to be a high performer regardless. It's going to be a question of if that high performance ends up driving TVL to their chain. Obviously, since they're not EVM compatible, there's going to be like specific bridge and like all the stuff that you need to do to get there. So is that going to be a hurdle for people to actually get involved in the ecosystem? Or is the performance going to be so good that you can't resist it, right? If a lot of protocols are being deployed there, a lot of things to do there in terms of like DeFi and NFTs and things of that nature. I think that's what it's really going to come down to, is if they have enough builders and if they can attract TVL to their chain in the first place. I would agree with Aptos. I would say that there should be some level of agreed upon standards, so that people aren't just like totally fudging their numbers and like saying that they can do like X transactions per second, because realistically all they're really talking about is the user experience of the chain. Right? Like, regardless of what you advertise, if it's a clunky experience, people aren't going to like it. If it's a really smooth experience that's really fast and low cost, then people are going to like it. Right? So that's really what it comes down to. And, after launch, we're going to basically be able to find out pretty quickly, was it exaggerated from a user experience perspective, or does it live up to, what they're claiming? Curious what you guys think.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious, like how many times around the crypto space that 300,000 TPS made it around to other people, right? Like, is that already going to be, when this launches on May 3rd today? Is that going to be the understanding that people are under when they go in and put an investment into it on the initial offering, right? So I think it's going to be interesting to see short-term action if that plays into, if some of the hype is around the 300,000 TPS when it's really 10K, so it's going to be interesting to see what that short-term action looks like.
Yeah, I think we've all kind of covered it, right? It's at this point, it's really just it feels unproven, right? And so we have to see it live. We have to see people using it. We have to see people starting to flock to that chain and starting to pull, TVL from some of these other L1s and even some of the L2s on Ethereum, right? But like ultimately, great team behind it. They're used to building really big platforms and solutions over at Meta. So they're kind of taking that to the blockchain space. They've gotten tons of funding over time. And I know we talked about this in our last video. They had a Series A of about 36 million that was led by A16Z, and then they had a $200 million, which put them at a $2 billion valuation that was actually led by none other than FTX.
FTX Ventures, right?
Yep. And so I thought it was actually really interesting. So Miston Labs actually repurchased that entire stake that was purchased by FTX, which ended up being about 96 million. And I think that kind of speaks a lot to at least Miston Labs like projection and thoughts of Sui as a whole, right? They're really betting on that long-term success of the network with their own like current liquidity that they have right now. So it should be interesting to see what direction this takes. For those of you asking, there is not going to be an airdrop. It is actually just going to be brought by token sale by Sui Community Access Program. So you can kind of think of it as two categories of the sale. The first is a recognition sale. So if you're not aware of this, you're not going to be part of it. It was a whitelisted group by the Sui Foundation that was a snapshot back on February 1st. So I believe they were able to purchase at 3 cents, and they were able to purchase, I think it was something like a max of 1.5 thousand tokens. So the general sale will actually be at 10 cents per token, and you can get a max of 10,000 Sui tokens, which puts you at about $1,000 US. So right out of the gate, those who were able to obviously get in early, and probably some who were able to get even earlier than that, they're going to come out with 2, 3, 4x profit right when this thing drops. So similar to some of these other airdrops and things that happen when tokens go on sale, you can tend to see a lot of volatility in that price action, so just be a little bit careful around that. But all in all, it seems like it's going to be a really good chain here moving forward, based on the team, based on them using this move language that's supposed to be really smooth. And if this 300,000 TPS is real, I mean, they could be going places quickly. So
yeah, and another interesting thing about Sui is that they kind of use a different consensus mechanism, I believe, where it's called proof of belief. It's more the idea where it's like a designated proof of stake. You have like trusted node or validators in the network that you kind of have to get validation through the Sui community to be able to be a part of this. One other thing that I kind of wanted to share is when we look at the difference between proof of stake chains like Ethereum that were originally proof of work, we see a staking ratio of around 15%. When you look at Cardano and Solana that were originally proof of stake chains, you have a staking ratio of 65-72% here. So it'll be interesting to see, maybe a month down the line where we see the staking ratio at for Sui, and how easy it is to do, where you can do that, what are the major players in that. I think that's definitely another episode we could do to kind of educate Sui buyers on that as well.
Do we just want to cover really quickly just a couple of spots where we're going to be able to, or folks can buy it?
Yeah, I think like the main exchanges, if you guys do want to get your hands on Sui tokens, I'd say go to the 4 main exchanges are going to be Binance, OKX, KuCoin, and Bybit. So that's where you can look forward to for launch in terms of getting your hands on the tokens. And yeah, best of luck to you if you guys are aping into the new launch. Always, as always, none of this is financial advice, and do your own research. With that, we'll be signing off, and look forward to covering Sui once the mainnet is launched in a week or so. Awesome. Wag me.